Kyle Rayner is one of the greatest lanterns of all time, and with the upcoming death battle between himself and Simone from Gurren Lagann, I knew that I had to cover Kyle Rayner, as no one else on the internet is a bigger weeb than me whenever it comes to defending the power levels of Kyle Rayner, or honestly most of the lanterns, if not all of them. So today we discuss the higher ends of Kyle Rayner, and just how exactly extreme they get with his wide array of abilities and hacks at his disposal as a White Lantern, and why he would fold all of Gurren Lagann's cosmology. Now, I'm a huge DC guy, and I'll admit I'm not crazy into Gurren Lagann, but I still did reach out to channel homie JobberGodot to get the lowdown on the scaling for Gurren Lagann, so let's get into some of the findings we've come across. Now, if you want some in-depth analysis on everything to do with Gurren Lagann, feel free to check out some other dudes' content on Simone, as I'm mainly going to be focusing on DC. However, the important stuff to know is that this dude Simone can affect a cosmology up to 11 or 12 like stacking dimensions at most, and I'm not talking like random 3D dimensions. No, like these are clearly higher dimensions. He basically absorbs and fires them at a foe at the end of the series, and it gets pretty wild. This alone has some pretty safe complex multi to hyperscaling, which is enough to solo most verses in general, but how exactly does that stack up to DC? So now that we have Simone from Gurren Lagann's entire cosmology covered, let's talk about where it would be placed inside of DC. Wait, placed inside of DC? You heard me right. At the very tip top of Gurren Lagann scaling, we find 11 or 12 dimensions at most. So the question remains, where are all the spatial dimensions inside of DC? Well, using context clues from the map of the multiverse on where matter ends, we can find that the Speed Force wall is the limit to any matter, or like anything from a spatial dimension. This should logically be where the entire cosmology of Gurren Lagann sits, inside the Orrery of Worlds, with their own specific world containing those said 11 dimensions tying into the rest. The Orrery of Worlds, or collection of all matter and dimensions in DC, has infinite stacking spatial dimensions, but we could make an exception for Gurren Lagann now that it exists in it. Since they only have like 11 or 12 dimensions, as they just simply couldn't access anything beyond that or anything higher past those dimensions. You don't think that this could possibly be the case inside of DC? Well, let me hit you with this scan that literally references people talking about M theory whenever they're just traveling the bleed. And they're talking about the all-encompassing bulk that binds it all together, all dimensions below it. And here's them climbing at least 11 dimensions before hitting the bleed. So all of this ties back into M theory. So even if you don't believe in the infinite dimensional statements that I have about 8 million of for all of DC, don't worry, you safely have this just up to the bleed. The 12th obviously being the bulk, or like the bleed itself. Keep in mind, the only reason we stopped at 11 here is because the people had just essentially discovered the multiverse within this canon. We're still trying to learn and figure out about all the infinite dimensions beyond that. But as I said, I have even more infinite dimensional scans here. There's about 1 million of them from people who would actually know, who exist in higher dimensions, and have seen all of these things. So none of this is mind-blowing or new for DC by a long shot. So with all of that together, yes, the entire Gurren Lagann multiverse could casually fit inside the Orrery of Worlds in DC, and even the strongest characters from Gurren Lagann wouldn't even be able to transcend the bleed, as there are infinitely more stacking dimensions beyond what they could access provably inside their own verse, just inside the Orrery of Worlds. So the question remains, does Kyle Rayner have scaling on this level? Of course he does. Even Green Lantern Kyle survived the Big Bang and being thrown through all of time in his fight with Parallax. The Big Bang in this DC context, which would include like the origins for all spatial dimensions that exist in DC exploding directly on top of them. And keep in mind, that is an infinite amount, in case I haven't really driven that point home enough.
String theory suggests there are actually 11 dimensions to reality. That's the magic number needed to sort of unify physics. And DC's stated that they have countless dimensions in the past, each one housing entities that transcend the previous worlds like infinitely stronger gods. It's mind-boggling. But your sixth dimension is actually different, right? That's what I took from it. It's not a physics-based spatial dimension. It's more like an administrative layer that oversees everything below, and mixes dimension is similar.
Yes, and I think, I mean...
And before you start typing up in the comments, wow, the Big Bang isn't that strong. Well, keep in mind that the Big Bang in DC is vastly more powerful and contextual than the real-world Big Bang, as it utilizes foundational energies that all individually scale to creation if you push and pull them well enough. I'll give you more on like Kyle Rayner's base scaling at some other time, but like, dude, any of this should be well below the full power of his White Lantern ring. But maybe you're worried about Simone's time missiles that he would fire at Kyle. Well, Kyle's demonstrated, even as a Green Lantern, the capability of existing despite all of reality, which does include time and every version of himself throughout the multiverse being entirely eradicated. He's been to realms outside of time and space, such as Vanishing Point, or traveling and navigating in concepts like the God Sphere. Not to mention that concepts such as like time alteration inside of DC is conceptual in nature and affects archetypes that are also conceptual in nature that also have their own scaling per hero. And anyone who manages to move past concepts like the time stream inverse no longer have to play by the same time rules as others, effectively making them immune to a lot of attacks from common time shenanigans. And this isn't even beginning to mention the fact that as long as he's a White Lantern and life exists and Kyle is feeling it, he can just charge his ring infinitely to remain at max power however long he chooses, kind of like that one time whenever, went through the Source Wall. Kyle Rayner as a Green Lantern is fighting threats such as Mongol, Major Force, Parallax Hal Jordan. He's even affecting angels, Jon Stewart, and literal gods from the God Sphere, which would be conceptually beyond the entire Gurren Lagann mythos. And like I said, just in his Green Lantern form. Most notably, his emotional attacks and manipulation of others when he's a White Lantern is just entirely different. After all, if he's really feeling it, he can just create waves of energy that can entirely strip you of your life. Well, life. That seems to be an ongoing, reoccurring concept that we keep pulling up because, after all, Kyle is the master and avatar of all life, having overpowered the very concept of life and every other emotional concept that exists in DC, simultaneously, minus Parallax, because Sinestro is totally hiding him, proving that he has powers over multiple concepts across DC, not just one. But before I go on for another 20 minutes just hyping up White Lantern scaling, man, let's actually discuss another hypothetical scaling chain for Simone that will become incredibly relevant for the next conversation and driving the point home for GL's W here really hard. So I've been rolling around the internet, I've seen a few of these Gurren Lagann arguments. Let's bring up the really high-end ones. What if we accept outer-versal arguments for Gurren Lagann? Does that really change things too much in my eyes? Yes, but not necessarily in any meaningful way. You see, DC has many realms outside the concepts of space or time, and the scaling for that term, as I referred to it earlier, is outer-versal realms. It also depends on where exactly you think the limits to time is, because unfortunately the map of the multiverse for DC doesn't directly mention time realms, but it does show worlds containing those times on it. It's important to consider that the time stream, which is an outer-versal realm encompassing the concepts of space and time entirely, and is transcendental to the things below it. The Bleed also has similar statements of existing outside these worlds and their times, but either way, scaling just outside of either of these realms doesn't put you in a top-tier pantheon amongst DC. Let's just lowball DC and say that the Gurren Lagann characters would become capable of navigating through a realm in the God Sphere. Let's just give them their own God Sphere realm somewhere in Skylands, okay? None of the characters from Gurren Lagann would scale to any of these higher realms, nor would they be capable of fighting other powerful gods from Skylands or wherever they may come from in the God Sphere, as these other gods in the God Sphere have scaling in these realms or scale to them, especially at like the higher end sides of each individual lesser realm. It's important to note that in the God Sphere there are many smaller realms, and most beings don't scale to the smaller realms, and let alone like the entire God Sphere as a whole. But Simone isn't here to fight the Sphere of Gods or even gods in the God Sphere. They're here to fight Kyle Rayner. So has the White Lantern Kyle Rayner actually fought gods from the God Sphere before? Yes, such as the God of Tamaran and our favorite Teen Titans Starfire's god of choice, Exhal. Kyle had to hold back on her unless he wanted to kill everyone on the planet and her, as gods with this level of power have problems exerting it inside of reality because, well, they'll just blow up the universe. or the planet. Kyle has also fought the God Killers, who had the ability to harm beings from the God Sphere as well. Not to mention lesser versions of Kyle have fought tons of new gods in his time. Hell, Kyle has a long history, even as a Green Lantern, of fighting gods from the God Sphere or directly scaling to figures who can fight them, and even on the high-end versions. Take for example Darkseid's son Graven. New gods are self-aware concept beings, and Graven was considered an op for Kyle when he was simply a Green Lantern at the beginning of his stories. And since he has thrashed him multiple times, even when he was amped and jokerized at one point in time, so you can't say there was no morals going on there. Kyle also went to the true form New Genesis and interacted with new gods there, eliminating the argument of, but they were just avatars. Not to mention the fact that it was even the greatest of the good guy new gods. Good old Highfather, who sought Kyle Rayner's power, is more powerful than anything he possibly could mess with, and considered him a direct link to the source, if not the source itself. But I'm, in my opinion, stretching to even grant Gurren Lagann something like this, because chances are it would just be somewhere in the bleed. It's a monstrous highball, I know, but this should really smack down the difference of power between Kyle and most other figures in fiction, let alone like Gurren Lagann, right? You see, unlike most cosmologies, we have a map of everything. It's the map of the multiverse I keep referencing to. And this was created at the time of the New 52, and this is when White Lantern Kyle was the most active, as he didn't really show up for a very long period of time. Each one of these segments of cosmology within this map is transcendental to the layers below it, and if you remember our last chat, we had went from an Earth all the way up to the God Sphere. But the God Sphere isn't the end of the map of the multiverse. In fact, it's several layers below it. If you continue forward, you have Limbo, which conceptually transcends the God Sphere. Then the Monitor conceptually transcends that, and then you finally come across the final barrier to our creation as we knew it at this point in time. I have to say that because retroactively we also know that there is a sixth dimension that also sits on this map. We just didn't learn of these events until the events of 2018's Justice League. However, we can brush past that and, let's say, hypothetically not even include it. The Source Wall itself is my favorite cosmological structure in history, and if you want to know more about it, I actually have a video focusing on that. It's a banger, go check it out, give me a like there. And you're probably asking, why are you bringing up the ultimate barrier that keeps anyone from attaining the powers of the source itself, this enigmatic mega energy source that created everything past the Source Wall? Well, that same barrier pretty much nukes even the highest tiers of the multiverse. The figures like from the God Sphere or anything along those lines, such as Darkseid or even Yugioh. Heroes like Superman or even Hal Jordan cannot escape the wall once they touch it. It simply absorbs everything and makes them into the wall more so than anything. In fact, there is actually a list of people of around 10 dudes who've ever crossed the Source Wall in history, and believe it or not, Kyle Rayner's one of them. But it doesn't even stop here, boys. He actually passes through the Source Wall, and while out there, Kyle Rayner stated in the Overvoid, finds the source and the life equation. So for everybody saying Kyle is only strong because of the life equation, keep in mind, he did all of this before he even got the life equation. Alright? Whilst here, he accidentally affects the source of creation and creates a being called Oblivion. Later on, this Oblivion guy is basically going to end everything in existence, and Kyle Rayner's understanding of existence is the multiverse map at this point in time. And so, Kyle gets a little desperate, and Kyle starts using his higher end powers. And what exactly do some of those higher end powers include? Well, after failing in traditional combat against him, Kyle starts doing the whack shit, okay? Remember the things we talked about earlier, the Source Wall? Well, Kyle can just summon Source Walls whenever he wants. If you remember what I said earlier, anything that touches the wall is stuck to it forever. He does this to trap his foe in an area, but it had more of an effect than that. You see, one of the issues with the Source Wall is it's at the edge of creation, and the source is always hiding behind it. So, here Kyle summons his own Source Wall on Earth and flies into it to effectively get to the source faster than flying to the end of the universe to do so. effectively granting him the ability to have source tier hacks anywhere he is at. You're not really going to be able to trap him anywhere where he's not going to be able to reality warp people out of existence by altering the source code unto itself. Here, fighting against Oblivion, he actually affects the source again to write him entirely out of existence as far as Kyle Rayner could, and dude, this is just absolutely insane. He's altering the source. The source itself is one of the strongest figures, if not the strongest figure, in existence in the modern day. Feats on this level are counted on one hand to give you an idea, especially in an era where there was nothing indicating the source was weakened or anything along those lines like it has in multiple prior stories. This makes White Lantern Kyle Rayner one of the most powerful beings in DC across all time. Don't get me wrong, Gurren Lagann rides on its blatant higher dimensional statements and showings, and it does it really well, but the problem is when you run across a verse with a much larger cosmology, with figures who can manipulate cosmologies that are that size, this is just entirely on a different level, unfortunately. So let's just consider how exactly this would go. No matter how high in the cosmology Simone could provably reach, Kyle can reach beyond that, especially as a White Lantern. No matter how large Simone gets, Kyle can still affect him, as he still has emotions. Nothing is stopping Kyle from stripping Simone of his life if he does get angry enough to do so, and nothing indicates that Simone could ever break away from source walls that Kyle can summon because he's never demonstrated resistances on the level of the structure of a source wall. No matter how you try and look at this entire thing, Kyle should obliterate Simone via basic deductive reasoning. But tell me what you think down low, guys. I spent a massive amount of time editing this bad boy up. This is being literally recorded as of Monday, and I'm gonna try my best to get this out before we actually make it to this battle, but who knows, man, maybe it'll come out afterwards. Be sure to like and subscribe as usual, because I was trying to be all business on this bad boy. And if you like this, maybe I'll react to the death battle. Who knows? We'll see what happens, boys and gals, but as usual, we'll catch you next time, Lanterns. Later.
You'll join my list of dead after I tear you in half. And I laughed at the thought of them controlling me. I'm the ultimate dragon that spawned everything. I resist and